Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, our topic is about the major transition, the fundamental shift of personality from survival mode to living mode. Today, I would like to show you two extremes, the extreme of survival mode and the extreme of living mode. But this does not mean that once we have made this transition, we remain in one of these modes forever. Or if you notice aspects of survival mode in yourself while watching this video, it does not mean that it is irreversible. Survival mode is fundamental. We are born with it, we carry it with us, and we preserve it. It is necessary for us as a means of self-preservation. This survival mode is very physiological. And initially, a child is completely focused on themselves. The child is truly in survival mode because nothing depends on them, and they are trying in some way to find their place in the world. And their main mode is to absorb benefits. They are not yet able to give anything back to the world. And while survival mode is enough for us in childhood, as we become teenagers and start to socialize, we realize that we have to change, meaning we need to take the outside world into account more. We begin to live in it more. So I hope you have your notes ready. If you don't have notes, you can write things down on your phone. I will read it out loud. If you're watching the video on your phone, you might not be able to see, so I'll read out what is written here. So, the location, the position of the self in survival mode and in living mode. In survival mode, the world is around me. That is, I am at the center. And the emotions that arise in a person inform them about what the world is like. So in survival mode, if I feel bad, it means the world is doing something bad to me. And the only alternative is that I am not good enough for the world to give me what I want. In other words, the personality is at the center of the universe. And the whole world exists only in relation to it. When we move beyond this self-centeredness, and it truly is a fixation on oneself, then for the first time we sense our own smallness and realize that it is not the world around me, but rather I am within the world. In other words, it is the facts that tell me what the world is like, not my emotions. My emotions tell me about who I am. In survival mode, a person does not recognize their own egocentrism. They cannot even conceive of it. But this egocentrism exists in each of us. And if we do not see it, then it is certain that only it exists. That is, perceiving the world is impossible without relating everything to oneself. In other words, we are the standard, the norm, and we are what defines the universe and what it is like. The second point is excessive emotions. Anyone who wants to copy this word for word can pause the video and then copy it from a screenshot. I will read it aloud. Excessive emotions. When I am in survival mode and everything relates directly to me, my emotions become overwhelmingly strong, that is to say, affective. I cannot perceive another person as separate from myself. If I come into contact with someone, if they appear in that very world that surrounds me, as we discussed in the first point, then they become relevant to me. Their overall mood, their carefully chosen words, and their immediate reactions to my presence and actions cannot be truly perceived or understood as isolated elements, but rather as an interconnected and inseparable whole. This act of drawing others deeply into the intricate world of my own self invariably creates excessive and intense emotions. For example, imagine someone sits down. Let's say you're at a sports event, mats are spread out, and someone sits on a particular mat. This doesn't evoke any emotions in you. But if they happen to sit on your personal mat, or if other people deliberately take seats in a movie theater that you've already carefully picked out and clearly claimed as your very own, then the individual person sitting in that specific spot will inevitably trigger excessive and strong emotions, because that's now truly my seat, my designated space. If I walk into a restaurant, that becomes my space, the space I occupy. I don't perceive this space as existing outside of my world. That's why the 0 point is when others are identical to me and they behave the way I want them to. They reflect me the way I want to be reflected. Many people don't understand this. In my opinion, the 0 point is everything. And everything that doesn't go my way is perceived as a tragedy, as a catastrophe, as something bad, as something wrong. That's why people who enter the world, the space that I consider mine, are supposed to reflect me in a positive light. And many mistakenly believe that they are fixated on others, but in reality they are fixated on others' reactions to themselves. This intense and profound reaction, once I have carefully and deliberately pulled the objects, the people of others, into my personal world and sphere of influence, I then begin to patiently endure their wrong or inappropriate behavior, or I may choose to tolerate their wrong or unacceptable attitude, or I might become intensely angry about it. I may feel a deep sense of anger welling up inside, or I may choose to express my anger outwardly and overtly. When we shift from survival mode to truly living, then there arises a sense of I am one among many. In that same restaurant, I am just one of many customers being served by the waitstaff. I am one of many viewers who have come to the cinema. That is, as soon as the cinema is designated as the world around me, then, for example, a tall person sitting in front of me becomes the wrong person. He creates a sense of wrongness in my 0 point, where the norm is the way I want it to be. A person, when living in a state of truly experiencing life, not just surviving, is not egocentric and feels a sense of separateness from the world. But this separateness is by no means detachment. Because when a person does not have the opportunity to be separate, when they are in survival mode, they freeze up and become detached from the world. In other words, indifference appears. So it's either I care about everything or I don't care about anything at all. It's as if it's impossible to gauge the distance between yourself and another person. In egocentrism, in this basic mode that we come into the world with, we have intense reactions to the wrong people. But when we are already separate, when I am just one of many people living in the world, those intense reactions to others disappear. You can easily observe this in your reactions to your close family members. They have already been designated as objects in the world around me, and that's why my reaction to them is stronger. And many people can only avoid reacting intensely to their loved ones by distancing themselves, either emotionally or physically. In other words, they remove those objects that provoke a strong reaction in them. They avoid interacting with the objects that are drawn into the world around them. And if I am in survival mode, I will constantly feel like I am enduring, because let me remind you, the norm and the 0 point is when everything, in my view, is for me and around me. The first sign of transitioning from survival mode to living mode is a decrease in anger. That is, I stop getting angry at what I perceive as wrong, including I also feel less anger toward myself if I do something wrong. Because in survival mode, I perceive my real self as the support staff for a great person. In other words, I maintain my sense of greatness, and this greatness also goes unrecognized because it is considered the norm. The world for me is the norm. When we talk about being fixated on oneself, being locked within oneself, living in a world of only oneself, we are dealing more with the beast than with the human. In other words, the personality actually shifts between the beast and the human. And in the beastly state, there is a lot of hatred, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, because the norm is the world outside of me. There is a storyline outside and a storyline inside. The third point. If the world is entirely centered around me, then I inevitably perceive it from within my own subjective experience, which is profoundly different than how it truly exists objectively. That is to say, my perception and the actual reality of the situation will diverge dramatically, creating a significant disconnect. In a state of heightened survival mode, I am convinced, for example, that I am actively and vigorously defending my boundaries and protecting my own space from perceived threats. But if I watch a video recording, I will see that I was aggressive, I was harsh, I was overbearing. I see that this is the case. But in the world according to myself, I am fighting to force the external world to serve me. I appear to myself to be in the right. I rely on my feelings, on my emotions, on how I feel. If I feel that a person, by not obeying me, is pressuring me, then that means he is the aggressor. Although in reality, he simply does not want to do what I need. And this distinction, my internal perception and what is happening outside, helps a person to establish personal boundaries. He comes to understand who he truly is. For example, if another person speaks about their feelings and says, yes, it hurts, I feel bad, I feel uncomfortable, then from the perspective of my own world, from a survival mode, I would say that he is manipulating me, that he is manipulating and pressuring me with all of this. But at the same time, when I, from my own world, start talking about my feelings, I want them to be respected. I want others to change their behavior. So, as you can see, in fact, we exhibit the same behavior. The behavior of another person speaking about their feelings and my own behavior when I talk about my feelings. And my insistence that my feelings be respected seems to me to be the right thing to do. But the behavior of another person when they talk about their feelings seems manipulative to me. And this difference between how I perceive things internally and how I perceive them externally helps us to see this survival mode, this beast mode. That's why many people, when they watch videos of themselves or see their own photos, say, that's not me. Or they can't watch them at all because it triggers a tremendous amount of anger. In other words, the image I have of myself inside, this is me, and the way reality reflects me don't match. And then I get angry and say it's a bad shot, a bad video, and so on. So this is about the ability not to ignore what I feel. That is, in survival mode, the psyche is focused on making things better for me, on what's best for me. But in the mode of truly living, I start to take other people into account. How do I affect them? Not just how I want to. For example, a person might say, I want to speak the truth, I'm honest, I'm open, and they feel grounded in being right. But when someone else starts telling them the truth, they perceive it as an attack. It's important to keep this distinction in mind at all times. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to understand why people react the way they do, or why your life and fate are the way they are. We'll discuss in more detail how to build realistic mental models in other videos on this channel. There are no personal boundaries. Point 4. There are no personal boundaries. If I am at the center of the universe, it's as if I am dissolved. I can be anyone. I am God in this world, and I decide who I am based on my feelings. So you see, this mindset can completely change your perception of yourself. In other words, there is no realistic self-perception in survival mode because there is no I. The I only emerges when another person appears, when the external world comes into play, and many people search for their personal boundaries, try to find out who they are, but at the same time they don't want to pay attention to the outside world or to how they present themselves outwardly. And because I am in survival mode, it is impossible for me to see my own dark sides because I will immediately attack myself, since I will perceive any flaw as a vulnerability Just as I attack the flaws and vulnerabilities of others, I attack myself in the same way. That is, when we are in beast survival mode, it is actually impossible for us to change, because anything we notice in ourselves, we attack ourselves for it so harshly that it's easier not to see it at all. There is no possibility for strategic life planning, because if I determine who I am myself, if I estimate my abilities based on what I want, then I can't plan strategically or see a realistic future, so to speak. It is either bleak or idealistic. Empathy. This is our fifth point. There is no empathy in survival mode. Many people mistakenly confuse a hypersensitive reaction. That is, they react with extreme sensitivity to how another person treats them. This is monitoring a person, reading every facial expression, but only from the perspective of an animal that is controlling its target, wanting to attack in time if danger arises, or to run away. And in survival mode, people are only of interest as objects in the world of me, and their reactions matter only to me. That is, because of this emotional captivity and being stuck in the world of oneself, a person cannot look at the world through someone else's eyes. In other words, empathy is the ability to see the world through another person's eyes, to understand who they are and how they perceive things. But this is impossible because I am like a fly stuck to sticky tape, trapped in survival mode in the world of myself. And that's why my words are out of place, and for some reason they provoke anger when, for example, I give advice on how to live better. But if we remember how it felt when people gave us advice, for example, when I say I feel bad and someone tells me to go wash my face, we can understand why a person reacts to us that way. In other words, those who give advice and those who receive advice seem to exist in different frames of reference. I can give advice, but you can't give it to me. That's why communication from a survival mode is always a form of manipulation. This is why a person feels as if they are pretending or lying, when in reality they are simply trying to shape the space of others to suit themselves, to charm them, so to speak, in order to receive the kind of attitude they need. And then I will also consider myself to be a good person. So you see, on one hand, there is no real care for the outside world, but on the other hand, there is a dependence on that reaction, because that reaction determines who I am. After all, I don't really understand who I am. My identity is flickering. It depends on my mood. If I'm in a bad mood, then I'm bad and the world is bad too. There is no constant understanding, neither of who I am nor of what the world is like. Everything depends on my mood. Because of this, appropriate behavior is impossible, and it's difficult to establish connections through empathy. In fact, two people in survival mode are speaking their own separate languages, completely unable to hear or understand each other. Thinking in survival mode is seen as a weakness, and it is attacked. That is, in this animal instinct, many people don't understand the difference between thinking and not thinking. Non-thinking is like shuffling the same deck of cards over and over again. In other words, a person does not analyze facts. In their own world, they have gathered distorted facts, about which they have already formed judgments from the perspective of their own worldview, and when they shuffle these, they are unable to think. That is why people in survival mode are only able to theorize in a limited way. They can quote certain theories, but their thinking is completely unrealistic and irrational. And in this irrationality, it is impossible to build either relationships or a business. That is, a person in their own self-centered world is always trapped in uniformity. Therefore, in survival mode, we can only be guided by instructions and rules. It's as if we are blind, we cannot grasp what is appropriate, and thinking is seen as a weakness because thinking always involves doubt. And I need to be right so that I can feel like a good person and not turn on myself. And when we try to think while in survival mode, it always leads to exposing ourselves and feeling vulnerable. Because a thinking person has doubts, and thinking does not involve proving that I am right. But in survival mode, it is absolutely vital for me to obtain that sense of being right. That's why it's as if I'm looking at the world through a keyhole, I can't see it fully, and I'm unable to think things through, to plan my behavior, to design a business, or to build relationships. In other words, it's a constant reflexive reaction to challenges, an inability to live with the future in mind or to set goals for the future. The seventh point is the creation of destruction. A person in survival mode will end up destroying everything anyway. I think many of you know what this feels like. No matter what it is, I end up destroying it. For example, someone starts a business and at first they're enthusiastic. But after achieving a certain level of success, the beast within us, operating in survival mode, finally relaxes. In other words, survival mode does not involve diligence or aspiration. Aspiration is created artificially, for example, when there's no money and you have to do something. Or, I want to be better than someone else. In other words, we need these primal incentives so that the personality doesn't remain inert and at rest. The goal of survival mode is to do nothing, to procrastinate. But the goal of a person is to evolve and to give something back to the world. That is, in survival mode, a person doesn't understand at all what it means to be humane, empathetic, or to have goals beyond oneself. As the saying goes, it's none of my business. It's like this. Even when a person gets anxious about what's happening in the world, that anxiety is about the objects in the world around them. Relationships also fall apart because a person can only endure, pretend, or bend to someone else's will for so long, mainly because they need something from them. But then the beast side takes over and the person starts attacking the other, trying to force them to become the way they want. All family conflicts come from this survival mode. People can't talk things through in a humane way. They can't agree. Everyone insists on their own way. Each person broadcasts their own truth from their own world and wants the other to accept that truth as their own. In survival mode, a person is always running away. Whenever a difficulty arises, they run from it. That's why so many things are left unfinished or never even started. Subconsciously, the beast inside is always looking for where things are easier, simpler, and so on. And the animal inside always dreams of getting something for free, of winning the lottery, just like that. In other words, effort and hard work feel humiliating to the survival mode. They are not always endured with compassion. And from the primal mode, true cooperation is impossible. For example, building a team and establishing communication within it, because people will leave. Or I might get caught up in these games of trying to reflect myself as good, because my self-perception depends on how others see me. And at that point, it's no longer business, but rather a series of manipulations with no clear purpose. And the eighth point is the relationship with reality, the relationship with reality. In survival mode, there is always a confrontation with reality. You are constantly at war, where you are either running away, attacking, enduring, or hiding. In other words, all relationships are animalistic, like those of a beast. Because there is the world of me, and this world is always in conflict with the rest of the world. Why is it important to understand the difference between survival mode and living mode? Because in survival mode, we are trapped in uniformity, unable to evolve, earn more, develop, or bring more peace and calm into our lives. If we keep feeding the beast within, that is, if we try to justify our beast actions from survival mode, then it seems as though we have no opportunity to become more human. And many people ask, why should I think about others? Why do I need empathy? Why do I need these personal boundaries? Why should I question what I feel? Well, that is certainly your choice. But as you can see, the beast has far fewer opportunities in this world. And the beast does not evolve. The beast always dreams of finding that perfect job, that perfect business, passive income, that perfect person, and finally doing nothing at all. But a person living in survival mode does not feel that they are truly living. That feeling of, I am alive, I am living my own life. We only experience it when we step out of survival mode. That's when we truly live in the world. Otherwise, we end up living in a small box and quietly dying in the end. I will wrap up now. And just a reminder, new videos are posted here every week, so stay tuned, keep exploring these ideas with us, and let them inspire your own reflections. We keep it practical, focusing on real-life situations. And if you'd like more, check out the playlist, Start Here, 5 Talks to Begin With. It's a great way to dive deeper and discover the core ideas behind this approach. If you're interested, feel free to subscribe. And if you'd like to go deeper, take a moment to share in the comments any other signs of survival mode you've noticed, beyond the 8 we've talked about. Your thoughts and ideas can really add to this conversation and help others reflect too. Add your thoughts to what I've shared. Let's inspire each other and aim for something bigger than ourselves. Don't hold back. I'll say goodbye for now and see you in the next video.